I can't feed my 3 children, she whispered, her voice breaking like autumn leaves beneath his boots. The rancher's weathered hands stilled on the fence post, 30 years of solitude suddenly heavy in his chest. He turned to face the desperate mother standing in his doorway, her children clutching her threadbare dress, and saw something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about family, sacrifice, and the true meaning of fatherhood. Samuel's weathered hand lingered on the doorframe, 30 years of solitude screaming at him to close it, to return to the safety of emptiness. But those children, those wide, trusting eyes staring up from faces too thin, too pale. "Come in," he heard himself say, his voice rusty from disuse. The woman, Elena, she whispered when he asked, stepped across his threshold carrying baby Rosa, while Maria and Diego pressed close to her torn skirt like small satellites orbiting their dying star. The ranch house felt suddenly foreign to him, its masculine corners and dust-covered surfaces exposed under the scrutiny of genuine need. Samuel watched Elena's gaze sweep across his sparse furniture, the single plate on the kitchen table, the silence that had been his only companion, and he saw his life through her eyes. Barren, forgotten. He moved toward the kitchen with jerky, uncertain steps, his calloused hands trembling as he pulled down plates he hadn't touched in years, plates his mother had used when this house knew the sound of family. "My husband." Elena's voice cracked like ice under spring sun. "He died 3 months ago. Construction accident." She settled Rosa on her hip, while Maria helped Diego into a chair too tall for his legs. "Left debts. I can't pay. The bank, the creditors, they want everything." Samuel's hands stilled on the cabinet door, memory flooding back like a broken dam, his own mother scraping together meals from nothing, the gnawing hunger that followed him to school, the shame of empty pockets and emptier cupboards. He served them his own dinner, planned for one, stretched impossibly thin among 4 plates, but somehow more nourishing than any meal he'd eaten alone. Diego's small fingers wrapped around the fork with the determination of a man, while Maria cut her baby sister's food into tiny pieces with the precision of someone who'd learned responsibility too young. Eleanor ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be her last, her dark eyes never leaving her children's faces. The lamplight caught the exhaustion in her features, the way worry had carved lines around her mouth, but also revealed something else fierce, protective love that would burn down the world for these 3 small souls. Samuel found himself leaning forward, drawn by the warmth radiating from their small circle, remembering what it felt like to matter to someone, to have purpose beyond mere survival. "You can stay tonight," he said quietly, the words surprising him with their certainty. "Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." Rosa gurgled from her makeshift high chair, reaching tiny fingers towards Samuel's weathered face, and something long frozen in his chest began. Slowly, impossibly, to thaw. Dawn broke grey and determined over the ranch as Elena stood in Samuel's kitchen, baby Rosa balanced on one hip, her chin lifted with the stubborn pride of a woman who'd been broken but never defeated. "I won't take charity," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Let me work. I can cook, clean, help with whatever needs doing. We'll earn our keep." Samuel studied her face in the pale morning light, seeing the steel beneath her desperation, the dignity that poverty couldn't strip away. He nodded once, gruff and practical. "My mother's room has been empty 15 years. You can use it." But as Elena bustled about his kitchen with an efficiency that transformed chaos into order, as the scent of real cooking-filled spaces that had known only bachelor meals, Samuel felt something shift in the foundation of his carefully constructed solitude. Diego burst through the screen door like a small hurricane, chickens squawking in his wake, grain scattered across the yard in his enthusiastic attempt to help with morning chores. "Papa Sam!" he called out, the title slipping naturally from his lips. "The chickens don't like me," Samuel found himself kneeling in the dirt beside the boy, his massive hands covering Diego's small ones as he demonstrated the gentle arc of feeding, the patience required to earn a chicken's trust. "They're just scared," he explained, his voice softer than it had been in decades. "Everything needs time to know you're safe." That evening, as lamplight painted golden squares across the walls, Samuel discovered Maria curled in the corner chair, baby Rosa nestled against her, both mesmerized by Maria's halting but determined reading of an old book about horses. The sight stopped him cold. His mother's voice echoed from memory, reading those same words in that same chair, her hands gentle on his dark hair. The house had been holding its breath for 30 years, waiting for this moment, waiting for life to flow through its rooms again. Eleanor appeared beside him, flour still dusting her apron from the bread she'd somehow conjured from his meager supplies. "They've never had a man who wanted to teach them things," she whispered, watching Samuel's face as Diego showed Rosa how to stack wooden blocks. "Their father worked so much, trying to provide. She didn't finish, didn't need to." Samuel saw the truth in Diego's eager questions about cattle, in Maria's careful attention to his stories, in Rosa's delighted giggles when he made funny faces. They were starved for more than food. They were starved for a father's attention, for someone to see their small accomplishments as miraculous. "It's temporary," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Just until I figure out what comes next." Samuel watched Diego fall asleep on the couch, exhausted from his first day of ranch life, tiny hands still clutching a piece of rope Samuel had taught him to braid. Temporary. The word tasted like a lie, sweet and dangerous on his tongue. The bell above the general store door chimed with false cheerfulness as Samuel stepped inside, his weekly supply list crumpled in hands that still smelled of the biscuits Elena had packed for his trip to town. "Mrs." Henderson's smile faltered when she saw him, her eyes darting toward the cluster of women whispering near the fabric display, their voices dropping to serpentine hisses. "Heard you're running a boarding house now, Samuel," came the oily voice from behind him, smooth as snakeskin and twice as dangerous. Richard Hawthorne emerged from the shadows between the shelves like a predator who'd been waiting for precisely this moment. His expensive suit, a stark contrast to the humble surroundings, his manicured fingers drumming against a walking stick he didn't need. "Taking in strays, are we?" The words dripped with implication, and Samuel felt his jaw tighten as Hawthorne's pale eyes gleamed with something that made his skin crawl. "Elena Martinez and her little brood," Hawthorne continued, circling Samuel like a shark scenting blood. "Such a tragic situation. Her husband Miguel owed me quite a substantial sum when he died. Construction materials, equipment rentals, emergency loans. I've been very patient about collecting." The store had gone cemetery quiet, every ear straining to catch the conversation that would fuel gossip for weeks. Samuel's knuckles whitened around his supply list as Hawthorne leaned closer, his breath reeking of expensive whiskey and entitlement. "Of course, I've been looking after Elena's interests, you understand. A woman alone with 3 children. She needs protection, guidance. She needs a man who can provide for her properly." The emphasis on those last words made Samuel's blood turn to ice water in his veins. "I've made her several generous offers. She could work off the debt in my household personal service, you might say. Very personal." Hawthorne's smile was the kind that belonged on wanted posters, all teeth and malice. "But now I hear she's taken up with you, living in sin under your roof. The children calling you Papa, according to my sources." "Mrs." Henderson gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat as the other women exchanged scandalized looks. Samuel felt the weight of their judgment, their assumptions, their willingness to believe the worst about a man who'd kept to himself for 30 years. But beneath their disapproval burned something far more dangerous, Hawthorne's sense of ownership, his casual threat wrapped in civilized language. "She'll come back to me eventually," Hawthorne said, tapping his walking stick against the wooden floor like a judge's gavel. They always do when the alternative is starvation. Or jail. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. You see, Miguel may have stolen some of those construction materials. Hard to prove now that he's dead, but if someone were to press charges. Samuel's vision tunneled to a pinpoint of rage, his massive hands clenching into fists that could break Hawthorne in half. But the bastard just smiled wider, knowing he held all the legal cards in a game. Samuel was only beginning to understand. The weeks that followed moved like honey through Samuel's life, each day bringing small revolutions that dismantled 30 years of carefully constructed isolation, one gentle moment at a time. Diego became his shadow, a 6-year-old storm of questions trailing behind Samuel's boots from dawn to dusk, his dark eyes wide with wonder as Samuel explained why horses needed different care than cattle, why fence posts had to be set at precise depths, why the morning ritual of checking water troughs could mean life or death during drought. "Why do the cows follow you?" "Papa Sam," Diego asked one morning, his small hand wrapped around Samuel's calloused finger as they walked the pasture together. "Because they trust me to take care of them," Samuel replied, not realizing until the words left his mouth that trust was a living thing, fragile and precious, growing between them like spring grass after winter's end. Maria surprised him with her quiet competence, appearing at his elbow when he struggled with a broken fence post, her small hands steady as she held wire while he worked, her concentration absolute as she absorbed every technique he demonstrated. "My papa used to fix things too," she said softly. And Samuel's heart clenched at the past tense, at the way she looked at him with hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could fill that vast emptiness again. But it was Rosa who undid him completely. Baby Rosa, who reached for him with perfect trust when Elena's arms grew tired, who settled against his broad chest like she'd been born to fit there, her tiny fist curling around his shirt button while she dozed in the afternoon heat. The first time she cried and only stopped when Samuel picked her up, Elena's eyes filled with tears she quickly turned away to hide. But not before he saw the wonder and terror warring in her expression. Evening became his favorite time, when Diego would drag him to the porch for riding lessons on Samuel's old mare, gentle as a rocking chair, while Maria curled beside him with whatever book she'd found, her finger tracing words as she read aloud, stumbling over difficult passages until Samuel's patient voice guided her through. Eleanor would watch from the kitchen window, her hands stilling in dishwater as she witnessed the man she'd known for weeks, becoming the father her children had never truly had, teaching Diego to sit tall in the saddle, showing Maria how to sound out complex words, singing old lullabies to Rosa in a voice rusty with disuse but rich with newfound purpose. "This is temporary," Elena would remind herself each night, but the words rang hollow as she watched Samuel tuck her children into bed with the reverence of a man who'd discovered his life's true calling, as she saw Diego's shoulders square with pride when Samuel praised his progress, as she witnessed Maria bloom under the attention of someone who believed her thoughts mattered, as Rosa reached for Samuel's face with the absolute certainty that he would always be there to catch her. The dust cloud on the horizon should have been warning enough, but Samuel was lost in the simple joy of teaching Diego how to properly hold a lasso when the official carriage rolled into his yard like a thundercloud pregnant with lightning. Richard Hawthorne stepped down with theatrical precision, his expensive boots clicking against the hard-packed earth, followed by Sheriff Morrison, whose apologetic eyes couldn't quite meet Samuel's as he adjusted the legal papers in his sweating palms. "Elena Martinez," Hawthorne announced, his voice carrying the false authority of a man who'd bought his power rather than earned it. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit theft." The words hit the peaceful afternoon like gunshots, shattering the fragile sanctuary Samuel had built around this makeshift family. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, flour still dusting her hands, her face draining of color as Hawthorne produced documents with the flourish of a magician revealing his cruelest trick. "Your late husband stole construction materials worth over $3,000 from my company," Hawthorne continued, savouring each word like fine wine. "Materials that were never recovered, never accounted for. As his widow, you're legally responsible for his debts and his crimes." Diego dropped his rope and ran to Samuel's legs, small arms wrapping around weathered denim, while Maria gathered baby Rosa protectively to her chest, all three children sensing the predator in their midst. "I'll pay it," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest like a prairie fire. "Whatever she owes, I'll cover it." But Hawthorne's smile widened with malicious delight. "Oh, Mr. Thornton, it's not about money anymore. It's about justice, about making sure criminals face consequences. The debt could be worked off. Of course, Mrs. Martinez could serve as domestic help in my household until the obligation is satisfied. Very close, personal domestic help." The implications made Samuel's vision blur red, his massive hands clenching into fists that could shatter Hawthorne's perfectly arranged face. But the sheriff stepped forward, hand resting on his weapon, and Samuel realized with crushing clarity that his strength meant nothing here. Law was Hawthorne's weapon, and Samuel was defenseless against its sharp edges. "I'll go," Elena said quietly, her voice breaking like autumn leaves. "I'll go with them." Diego's wail pierced the air as he tightened his grip on Samuel's legs, while Maria's brave facade crumbled into tears that cut Samuel deeper than any blade. "Mama!" "No!" Diego cried. "Papa! Sam! Don't let them take Mama!" The word "Papa" hung in the air like a prayer, a promise, a plea that Samuel couldn't answer. For the first time in 30 years, his physical power was useless, his protective instincts reduced to helpless fury as Elena kissed each child's head with the desperate tenderness of a condemned woman, whispering apologies and promises she couldn't keep, while Hawthorne watched with the satisfaction of a spider who'd finally trapped his prey. The old carpet bag that had carried Elena's life through previous upheavals now sat open on Samuel's mother's bed like a wound, swallowing the few belongings that had made this room a home for 6 precious weeks. Elena's hands moved with mechanical efficiency, folding the children's clothes with the careful precision of a woman who'd learned that keeping busy was the only defense against complete collapse. But Samuel could see the tremor in her fingers, the way she paused over Diego's small shirt as if memorizing its weight. "We have to go," she whispered to the children gathered around her like small satellites afraid of losing their orbit, her voice steady despite the tears carving silver tracks down her cheeks. "Mr. Hawthorne has legal papers. If I don't go with him, they'll put me in jail, and you'll have nowhere to go." Diego's face crumpled with the particular devastation of childhood, when the adult world reveals its capacity for incomprehensible cruelty. "But Papa Sam promised to teach me roping," he wailed, his small fists pressed against his eyes as if he could push back the tide of loss. "He said next week we'd work with the big lasso, the one the real cowboys use." Maria, ever the little mother, clutched baby Rosa tighter against her chest, but her own composure shattered like glass against stone. "He said we could plant a garden together," she added, her voice breaking on each word. "He said we'd grow vegetables and flowers, and I could have my own patch for sunflowers because they're tall like me." Samuel stood frozen in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space but feeling suddenly hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything vital from his chest. Papa Sam. They'd been calling him Papa Sam for weeks, the title sliding from their lips as naturally as breathing, and he'd accepted it without truly understanding what it meant, without recognizing the profound transformation occurring in the depths of his guarded heart. Elena's eyes found his across the room, and in them he saw his own devastation reflected, magnified by her understanding of what was being destroyed. She saw him not as the gruff rancher who'd taken them in out of duty, but as the man who'd learned to love again through Diego's endless questions, Maria's quiet wisdom, and Rosa's trusting embrace. She saw him as the father he'd become without realizing it, the papa he'd always been meant to be, discovering his purpose just as it was being ripped away. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, and Samuel knew she wasn't apologizing for leaving, she was apologizing for showing him what his life could have been, for opening his heart to a love so pure and complete that losing it would leave him forever changed, forever empty, forever knowing exactly what he'd never have again. The silence in the house pressed against Samuel's chest like a physical weight, thick and suffocating after weeks of laughter, echoing through rooms that had forgotten how to hold joy. He moved through the spaces like a ghost, haunting his own life. Touching the chair where Maria had read her stories, running calloused fingers over the table where Diego had proudly displayed his rope-braiding attempts, staring at the kitchen sink where Elena had hummed while washing dishes that actually needed washing, where the scent of real cooking had replaced the stale emptiness of bachelor meals. Tomorrow he would strip the sheets from his mother's bed, pack away the few toys he'd bought on his last trip to town, return to the solitude that had been his companion for 3 decades, but tonight he needed to prepare for the death of hope he'd never known he carried. His mother's old trunk sat in the corner like a reproach, filled with memories he'd avoided sorting through since her passing 15 years ago, but now seemed like the appropriate penance for a man who'd discovered love only to lose it to his own powerlessness. Beneath faded photographs and carefully folded quilts, his fingers found the worn leather Bible she'd carried to church every Sunday until arthritis made the journey impossible, its spine cracked from decades of faithful reading, its pages yellowed with time and marked with her careful annotations. He opened it reverently, expecting comfort, but instead found an envelope marked, "For Samuel when he's ready to understand," in his mother's precise handwriting. Inside, documents that made no sense at first: mineral rights surveys, bank statements showing deposits he'd never known existed, legal papers transferring ownership of land far beyond their small ranch, correspondence with companies he'd never heard of discussing royalties, and lease payments that made his hands shake as he calculated the numbers. His mother, who'd darned his socks by lamplight and stretched every dollar until it screamed for mercy, who'd taught him the value of hard work by working alongside him in fields that barely sustained them, had been quietly wealthy for years. Wealthy enough to pay Elena's debts 100 times over. Wealthy enough to give those children every opportunity life could offer. Wealthy enough to transform struggle into security with the stroke of a pen. She wanted you to learn what money couldn't buy first. He whispered to the empty room, understanding flooding through him like ice water, his mother's wisdom revealing itself just moments too late to matter. He was rich, richer than Hawthorne, richer than his wildest dreams, powerful enough to crush any legal threat with the weight of his resources, and Elena was gone, taking with her the children who'd called him Papa, who'd filled his heart just in time to break it completely. The Hawthorne mansion blazed with the light of 100 candles, its windows spilling golden warmth across manicured lawns, while the sound of cultured laughter and clinking crystal drifted through the evening air, like the music of privilege celebrating itself. Samuel tied his horse to the wrought-iron gate, his worn boots echoing against marble steps as he approached the grand entrance, the legal documents and bank draft folded carefully in his coat pocket, like weapons waiting for their moment. The butler who answered the door took one look at Samuel's weathered face and work clothes, his mouth opening to deliver the dismissal that men like Hawthorne expected their servants to provide. But something in Samuel's eyes, a quiet certainty, a dangerous calm, made him step aside instead. The dining room stretched before Samuel like a theatre set designed to showcase wealth and power, its mahogany table gleaming beneath the chandelier's light, surrounded by the territory's most influential citizens who had come to witness Hawthorne's latest triumph. And there, serving wine with the mechanical precision of the defeated, was Elena, her dark hair pinned back in a style that stripped away her dignity, her beautiful face carefully blank as she moved between guests who treated her like invisible furniture, their conversations flowing around her as if she were a ghost condemned to serve in silence. Hawthorne sat at the head of the table like a king surveying his domain, his pale eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he gestured toward Elena. "My new domestic acquisition," he was saying, his voice dripping with implication that made the married women exchange uncomfortable glances while their husbands leered with thinly veiled interest. Such a tragedy when decent women fall so far. But thankfully, there are still gentlemen willing to provide guidance. Samuel's entrance cut through the conversation like a blade through silk, his presence filling the doorway with a quiet authority that made conversations die mid-sentence. "Mr. Hawthorne," Samuel said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence with the weight of judgment, "I've come to settle Elena Martinez's account." He pulled out the bank draft with deliberate slowness, placing it on the polished mahogany with the soft rustle of paper that sounded like thunder in the hushed room. $3,758. Principal, interest, and penalties. In full. Hawthorne's face drained of colour as Samuel continued, his voice never rising above conversational level but carrying to every corner of the room. "I've also brought copies of the original loan documents, which clearly show the materials were legitimately purchased, not stolen as you claimed, along with witness statements from Mrs. Martinez's neighbours confirming your unconventional collection methods." The dinner guests shifted uncomfortably as Samuel's quiet dignity exposed the rot beneath Hawthorne's polished veneer, their shocked whispers building like storm wind as they realized they were witnessing not a business transaction, but the complete destruction of a man's reputation served with the devastating precision of simple truth. The wagon ride home felt like a dream painted in golden afternoon light. Elena pressed close to Samuel's side while the children chattered with the manic energy of birds released from cages, their voices weaving together in a symphony of questions and exclamations that made Samuel's chest swell with something he'd never dared name until now. Diego bounced on the wagon seat, his small hands gripping Samuel's arm as he recounted every terrible moment of their separation, while Maria held baby Rosa like a precious treasure finally returned, and Elena sat silent beside him, her eyes reflecting wonder at the miracle of second chances, at the man who'd walked into hell itself to bring them home. As the ranch house came into view, Samuel felt his heart hammering against his ribs with the rhythm of a decision that would change everything. The words he'd rehearsed during the long ride now seeming impossibly inadequate for the magnitude of what he wanted to offer, what he desperately hoped they would accept. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion as he helped her down from the wagon, the children racing toward the house like small tornadoes of joy. "I have something to ask you." She turned to face him on the same porch where she'd first whispered her desperation, where he'd seen his future reflected in 3 pairs of trusting eyes. But now the fear was gone, replaced by something deeper, stronger, more permanent than mere survival. "I want to marry you," he said, the words tumbling out with the awkward sincerity of a man who'd never proposed before, who'd never imagined himself worthy of such happiness. "Not just to protect you, though I'll spend my life doing that. Not just to provide for the children, though they'll never want for anything again. I want to marry you because I love you, because I love them, because these past weeks you've shown me what it means to be alive." Elena's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled over. But they were tears of joy now, of recognition, of a woman seeing her prayers answered in the weathered face of the man who'd become her anchor in the storm. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Samuel, yes to everything." The children had stopped their exploration of the porch to watch this adult moment they sensed was important, and Samuel knelt down to their level, his massive frame folding like a prayer as he opened his arms wide enough to encompass all 3. "Diego, Maria, little Rosa," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you like me to really be your papa? Not just Papa Sam, But your real papa? Forever and always? Their answering yes erupted like cannon fire, echoing across the ranch land and rolling toward the horizon like a declaration of joy that would carry for miles. And as they crashed into his embrace, as Elena knelt beside them to complete the circle, Samuel knew he'd finally found his place in the world. 6 months of autumn mornings found Samuel standing on the same porch where Elena had first whispered her desperation, but now the silence was filled with the symphony of family life. Diego's laughter echoing from the barn, where Samuel taught him the finer points of horse training, Maria's concentrated whispers as she worked through arithmetic problems at the kitchen table under Elena's patient guidance, baby Rosa's delighted squeals as she chased chickens around the yard with the fearless determination of someone who'd never known hunger, never known the terror of homelessness. Samuel watched Diego demonstrate the proper way to approach a skittish mare, his small shoulders square with pride earned through months of Samuel's careful instruction, and marveled at how the frightened boy who'd scattered chicken feed had grown into a confident young rancher who spoke to animals with the gentle authority Samuel had spent decades learning. In the golden afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, Maria bent over her slate, Elena's hand covering hers as they formed letters together, and Samuel remembered the desperate woman who'd first crossed his threshold, how her frantic energy had transformed into the peaceful competence of someone who cooked with joy instead of survival, who planned menus instead of rationing scraps, who hummed while she worked because happiness had finally found room to grow in the spaces where fear used to live. Each evening brought the ritual that had become Samuel's greatest treasure, rocking Rosa to sleep in the chair his own mother had used, feeling her tiny weight settle against his chest as trust made flesh, listening to her breathing slow and deepen while Elena tucked the older children into beds they knew would be there tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that, and all the tomorrows they could imagine. "Funny thing," Samuel murmured to the prairie wind that carried the scent of Elena's bread and the sound of Diego's whistling. "I spent 30 years thinking my loneliness was my curse, and Elena thought her desperation was her shame, but it turns out they were just doorways we had to walk through to find each other." The truth settled into his bones with the weight of revelation. Family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you chose, something you built with daily acts of love and protection and sacrifice, something that could bloom between strangers who decided to see each other as worthy of devotion. As the first stars appeared overhead and Elena called them all in for dinner, Samuel wondered how many people were walking through their own doorways of loneliness or desperation right now, not realizing they might be one whispered prayer, one open door, one act of courage away from discovering that the family they'd been searching for might be waiting in the last place they'd ever think to look.